digital worlds that exist in parallel with there was a lack of consensus around the baseline understanding of what Metaverse brings along, what risks and opportunities. So I'm really excited for this next panel. And I would invite them to the stage, situate yourself on the stage as we go. Please, we are talking about demystifying the metaverse, what is the metaverse, and why does it matter? Why should we know today? What should we know today for a better tomorrow? This talk creates common consensus and understanding across multidisciplinary audience. Please welcome Dr. Courtney Cockburn, an associate professor at Columbia University, the School of Social Work, and faculty at the Columbia Population Research Center and Data Science Institute, where she co-chairs the Computational Social Science Working Group. She employs a transdisciplinary approach to improve the characterization of measurement of racism and examine the role of racism in producing racial inequities in the health. In health, she also works at the intersection of emerging. She's the lead creator of Thousand Cut Journey, immersive virtual reality experience of racism that premiered at the 2018 Tribeca Film Festival. She's also the co-founder of Justice Technology and yeah. Welcome, Courtney. And next with us is our XRSI advisor, litigates disputes and counsels clients for many industries in the matter of commercial branding, rights, creative expressions, and privacy. He has devoted his career to understand technology. And I know that Brian Blossom is one of the earliest pioneers and in this space from a perspective. I personally myself rely on his counsel time and time again as an advisor to XRSI. And last but not least, moderating this panel, my colleague, my friend, and the president of the Cyber XR Coalition, Hackers. Noble is a veteran full-stack product executive at data and AI governance, emerging technologies, human-centered product delivery. Noble's professional career is centered on data, ethics, and emerging tech. From evangelizing data privacy tools to empowering enterprises to eliminate biases and promote fairness in machine learning, as well as push the limit of mobile, web, and wearables and special computing applications in a human-centered way. It's delivered award-winning solutions for over a decade, from abstract to concept to impactful products, digital product solutions. Noble is a certified AI product manager, certified science master, and formerly a developer expert in product strategy, and also the visionary behind the non-inclusive program for Cyber XR. Okay. So Noble, welcome everyone, welcome. Please take it away.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me, Kavya?
Yes.
Okay, great. I had to reboot my headset, and I'm glad everyone is here today with us. How's everybody doing so far? How are we enjoying the first day of Metaverse Safety Week? Can I get some reactions in the air? Woohoo! All right, so today we're going to have a panel-style discussion on the metaverse, right? And I guess the best way to do that would be to baseline and define what we mean by metaverse. I know many of you have heard, you know, if there are 20 people in this room, we've probably heard 70 different versions of that definition. So how do we define metaverse in this context? Courtney, do you want to kick us off? Or Brian?
I'll give it a go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I am personally, I don't care for the term metaverse. I think we've all kind of fallen into it because it's the easiest to use. I think that I'm at least hoping over time we will move away from that into something a little bit more descriptive and precise. But I think Dr. Rosenberg gave a good top-down view of what it will entail. There will be virtual worlds, there will be augmented worlds. I was glad to hear him draw that distinction. I think that we are still in the space where people are still fighting to define what those platforms will look like. Obviously, Meta with a more virtual-oriented approach, and Apple with the opposite, and even Apple refusing to use the word metaverse in its conversation. So I don't like to use the term because I don't think it yet means anything. I think, as you pointed out, Noble, we don't agree what the definition of the word is. So that doesn't make it a useful word. But the things that we're talking about when we say metaverse, I think, include both the virtual worlds, the augmented world, and frankly, even the adjacent senses. We focus a lot on visual environments, but you're seeing more and more development of haptic technology. Smells, any other accenting of the rest of the five senses, or more, however you define them, that define our experience of the virtual or of the physical world. And so really, I think it encompasses all the technologies that seek to digitally either enhance or even replace the way that we use our physical senses in the real world to experience reality.
That's insightful. Courtney, is your mic working by any chance? Would you like to take a stab at your definition? Oh no! So we're having some mic problems with Courtney, and hopefully, Courtney, you can get that resolved. I had the same thing during the keynote, and and I had to give it the old reboot to get my audience back. But we'll plow ahead. If Brian, if you want to keep it moving, and Courtney, if you could see whether you can sort of get that resolved, or get Banu or someone to help us. So today, what I wanted to do is to ground some of the conversations around the economics of this metaverse, or at least, I also, by the way, Brian, hate using that term. I'll explain why in a little bit. I also want to sort of anchor a lot of our conversation today on risk and safety, if that's okay. I think it's on brand with with Metaverse Safety Week as well. So with that, I know Courtney was kind enough to provide some questions as well, and so we'll go through that. But I wanted to start with, in what you've seen. I've seen a lot of discussions about the metaverse, and I don't want to rehash those same types of questions. But I do want to understand from your standpoint, Brian, what the vision, what you've seen as far as how, different industries and consumer services are structuring and governing this new computing medium, we'll call it, whether it be totally immersive or augmented in the way that we view things.
Sure. So the way things are right now is obviously still very rudimentary. And I think that by default, we see most of the applications, most of the monetization of this technology taking the form of games, because I think that's the easiest starting point for exploiting these new experiences, because they are completely and intentionally and transparently false worlds, defined spaces, walled gardens that a player can choose to enter and take full advantage of doing that. They can pay for the access to the game, pay for in-app purchases within the game. I know my own kids enjoy playing Pokemon Go, and I still struggle to define that as an augmented reality game because it's not really key to the experience. But I do think it's a nice little window into what
Mhm.
companies are trying to do, and even specifically Niantic would love to do, is to continue to blend augmented experiences into the physical world, uh, initially with a gaming mechanic to them, a gaming motivation to get people involved, but
Mhm.
ultimately to do more, and I think ultimately engaging in consumer experiences. And I think they're going to be the micro transactions. You know, when we step forward into the 2030s, like Dr. Rosenberg said, and we're looking at a more mature environment where we have applications in which we're using these technologies to perform daily tasks. I think that the really, just like the internet we have now, the way that companies will make the most money off of us is by these microtransactions or in-app purchases, if you want to call it that, except this time the app is reality. And every interaction that we have can have a small price to it, and that adds up pretty quickly.
So I completely agree with you here because gaming is an established medium. You from a I guess a content developer standpoint, you get a lot of the baseline needs in order to sort of build upon. You master the way to sort of gather someone's attention in order to sort of provide some level of value in a good way. And you also understand what practices may lead to dark patterns and negative impacts on our digital wellness as we see today in traditional applications. And so I love how you frame that, being that it's almost as if gaming is sort of always the lowest hanging fruit. It also gives you sort of those fundamental building blocks for what's to come. Have you oh,
Not in the way that I'd like to see, right? Not in a commercially meaningful sense, because I think if they had made the impact that we're hoping that eventually they'll make, then we would have to ask, right? We'd be familiar with them. But in terms of prototypes, in terms of ideas that are certainly underway, I think different companies are taking one experience. And what I've seen over the years of representing companies in the space is those grand visions of, hey, we're going to take this technology, run out and change the world. Those grand visions are being narrowed to specific, finite, achievable tasks. And I think I have in mind one particular company that I've done a little bit of work with over the years that started off with grand visions of saying, I'm going to create this headset. It's going to be useful for any and every purpose that we could think of. And it's going to be the hardware that people use to interact with the virtual world. And that ambition has now been narrowed down to, okay, we're going to do meetings, live virtual interaction, product design meetings, and we're all going to be able to look at the same virtual model of a product and be able to collaborate remotely in designing it. And we're going to do that task really well. And they're starting to get a little traction with that because that solves a problem, right? That solves a real
mhm,
world problem, and pick somewhere where there's already industrial investment and adds value to that. You know, I think also of the training, employee training applications. You know, they've seen a number of these, and again, somewhere where you've seen actual traction in providing value to existing right now real world companies, and that is putting a headset on an employee, putting them in a created virtual environment, and
mhm,
walking them through a situation that they're going to encounter in their actual employment and preparing them for that. Uh, you think about it as muscle memory,
mhm, mhm,
as you would even with physical exercise, right? Putting them in that environment where they're experiencing the whole range of emotions and sensory input that you can't get from a 2D media. This is one area where you've really actually seen some unique value add from this 3D virtual world experience. Walmart has done that. Walmart did that a year or two ago, training their employees for Black Friday. If you picked up that news item, right? They put them in this stressful environment with shoppers running all around and demanding deals, everything else, before they encounter that in the real world. Be prepared and know what to expect. And with a similar application for teaching manager in right, a virtual employee sit down in front of you and you have to actually speak the word and he reacts with emotion, he reacts with tears. It's really kind of a brilliant application. That, to sum up, it's those narrow use cases that I've seen the most traction with right now and doing one thing really well.
Back in 2014, or maybe a year later, I would work with, consulting firms like Accenture or Deloitte, and it's glad to see a lot of the groundwork that they put in at that time for using mixed reality solutions or augmented reality solutions in the enterprise. It's been fascinating to see where things are with, for example, Accenture using AR, augmented reality, mostly for training and applying that to a lot of their clients' needs. Anytime anything is manufactured, anytime anything is moved within a warehouse, their pick and pack, for example, within warehouse, anytime that anything is marketed and upskilling employees comes into that. But for the sake of allowing the audience to ask questions at some point today, I wanted to go back to the safety part, and frankly, I'm sure unless you all have been living under a rock, you've probably heard of OpenAI's effort with generative pre-trained transformers that are just blowing up the media right now, and frankly are very impressive. So Brian, and I was hoping Courtney would be back right now. Courtney, we're still hoping you can join us. I asked GPT-3, or Chat GPT rather, what was the most important risk and safety question to ask today? Before I ask that, this is going to be one of those little teasers so that you guys can pay attention. How do you think generative pre-trained transformers, large language models, are going to, two-part question, are going to impact mixed reality and the metaverse, since we're using that term, and what are things we should be aware of? And then I'll ask the question that ChatGPT wanted me to ask.
Sure. Well, I guess it depends the environment that we interact with this generated content in, right? If it's one thing if we're in a virtual world like this, where we're got our stationary boundaries that we're working with. If we see generative content in the real world through an augmented situation, that concerns me. You mentioned in physical safety, and maybe we're talking a little bit more broadly than physical injury, but that's the first thing I think of when you're walking down the street or interacting in any kind of real world situation with digital enhancement in your perception, is that ability to task switch between interacting with the digital and the physical. And the classic example of walking into a manhole or into a wall or something like that because you were paying attention to the wrong thing. AI and generating visual content and putting that up in front of you in unpredictable ways. That scares me, because it's hard enough to person to design an environment that is physically safe to interact with, let alone a generative AI. I've interacted with these image generating AI apps and the selfie ones and everything else, and for some reason they can never get the hands right. The fingers are always pointing in weird directions, and you would think that would be easy, but for some reason they can't do it. And that just tells me that if they can't make my hands point in the right direction, how are they going to make my body walk in the right direction? So yeah, dangers that you wouldn't expect.
One
And
guy,
that's
sorry.
kind of a surface level answer to the physical injury question. I don't know if your question goes broader than that.
No, no, that's good. I mean, there was a time where I would develop, so I would build and design software for wearable devices, head-worn wearable devices, and one of the guiding principles that we had to start with, to your point, was build for humans, right? Like, you know, human faculty, once we have occluded, what our eyes can naturally see, is replaced by something digital. And so we should always sort of build for, personal safety first, and not sort of shock people, and the like. So you're spot on. So as I promised, I know I teased the GPT-3 question, but in the theme of today's this panel, I wanted to know what should we know today for a better tomorrow, when it comes to risk and safety, and that along the lines was my prompt. Um, Brian, it it wanted to know a couple things. One that I'm going to pick out here is, and this is sort of fitting for you, I believe. I see an LL, I see Judd LLP. I don't know whether you're an attorney by trade or not, but I wanted to know, how will the metaverse impact existing legal and ethical frameworks, and what will be the potential implications for areas such as IP, intellectual property, freedom of speech, and jurisdiction?
Okay. Well, I am, and these are issues that I've given a bit of thought to over the years. They change as the technology changes, of course. And I always want to start with, as any lawyer does in any situation, start with precedent, right?
Right.
Because nothing we do is wholly and 100% unique. Is message to medium. There is a different aspect to these virtual and augmented experiences that we're talking about that raise unique questions. But we start by saying, well, what's the answer now in the most analogous media that we have, which would be, the internet as it exists today, and branch out from there. So I do think some of the unique questions around personal injury will be interesting.
Mhm.
I think that those will create duties. We have what's called the common law in the U.S. We have judge-made applications of general principles to fit new situations as they arise. Oh, good. I think we've got Courtney working her way back.
Woohoo!
Yeah. All right.
Come on
Welcome back,
up.
Courtney. Come on up here to the stage. Yeah.
There you go.
Here we go. Cool. So I'll wrap this up and then let you get a chance to bring Courtney into the conversation.
Yep, yep, yep.
So one in the part of the question you asked that interests me personally the most is the
Mhm.
intellectual property aspect of
Right.
it, because that's an area that I do some work in. And Dr. Rosenberg addressed this question from the human rights perspective of, what we see around us is all artificial, and we can't take for granted that what's real, what's not. Well, from my perspective as an IP lawyer, I look around and I say, well, you know what? Nothing here is pre-existing. Everything here is expression, and copyright law governs expression, and we think about that
Oh, we lost your audio.
defined expressions. But when we are actually physically living within an expressive work, there's a lot more opportunity for what we would normally think of as copyright infringement. Doing things with other people's expressive work that we might not otherwise do, or that might invade their rights. By the same token, there are certain things that we have to do with those works in order to actually uh, use the app the way that it's designed. So is there a broader sense of fair use, or what? impliedly allowed with that work. The pictures, the selfies that people are taking around here, that would normally be a copyright infringement. But if we're invited to do that, is it not? And then from a trademark perspective, trademarks, logos, and names and things that we use to indicate the source of goods. Again, Dr. Rosenberg took this point from a more of a privacy protection type of standpoint, but what about rights enforcement? If I am walking down the street in the physical world and I take a look at the Golden Arches and I am delivered a digital advertisement for Burger King, where are the boundaries between trademark rights? Is Burger King doing something that they shouldn't do with McDonald's logo? And those are the things I think are not only fascinating, but I think we see the as legal precedent, legal cases are litigated by companies with money, and money follows trademarks because they put a lot of effort and time into protecting them.
That's brilliant. We're still working through some technical issues with Courtney's mic. Courtney, I'm going to pause on my ChatGPT-3 generated questions segment of this panel. I hope you're enjoying it so far. Are there any pointed questions from the audience? I want to sort of open it up and have a discussion. And if they are, please use the hand raise feature if it is available to you. We'll gladly hear you out. Just make sure you get close to the stage, and hopefully it amplifies your voice. And while you think about your questions, perhaps I can ask another chat. Oh wait, do you have any takers? If so, unmute and you can ask.
You guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
We can hear you.
Yes, we could.
Yeah, that's right.
Can you guys hear me?
I do
Yes,
now.
please.
You can a little
ask the
closer to the.
question.
What are some utilities that you guys are seeing? On November 12th, so my name is Dr. JB. I go by the Metaverse Doc on social media. And on November 12th, I hosted a virtual summit, wellness summit, 7-hour summit, where I brought together professional speakers and really just held a summit focused on people's wellness for all professionals. So I'm not a gamer, I'm a doctor, but that was an example of how I've used the virtual spaces to host events.
What was the question specifically?
It was just
You
a
asked it at the
comment
top, and I
about.
missed it.
Oh no, I was saying that it was a comment about outside of gaming. What are some other ways that we're using this? And so this was just an example of how I used it, because I'm not a gamer, but how I'm finding utility in these virtual experiences.
Very good.
Courtney, do you want to take this one?
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Oh, yay. Well, we all have to have some patience, right? With
That's
using
right.
these technologies. So the question was about what some of the other uses may be. I can talk a little bit about what we're doing, and then I have some thoughts about process and getting more people to the table to design and create these spaces. So for instance, I have one of my doctoral students is working on creating virtual spaces for Black women to gather and seek alternative forms of therapy through groups and digital collectives and healing and build community and a sense of care, etc. We're also working on some options for bringing young people, for instance, from Harlem into our space here at Columbia and having them create and design spaces. And some of the things that we're interested in having them think about is, for instance, thinking through questions like, what does freedom feel like and what does it look like, and how might we build it in some of these digital spaces, that feeling of freedom. So thinking about ways, again, how to use the tools as a source of joy and healing and community. But I think we'll really start to push the envelope when we have people from disciplines like medicine, like you were saying, like your own background, and people from other spaces thinking about how to use the technologies. Until then, we're going to be pretty limited in terms of imagination and what gets produced.
Oh, that's fantastic, Courtney. Are there any other questions, or Brian, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I don't, but I'd be curious to know from Courtney, from a perspective of someone who hasn't been involved in the types of efforts yet that you described. Do you see the virtual world as overcoming some of the economic and racial barriers that your students and people you're working with might encounter in the physical world?
I think it depends on, it's possible. I think it depends on how we structure the space. So, I've been in conversation with some people, for instance, about how to ensure that communities that aren't typically engaged with these technologies get access sooner and start to build their economic systems within these spaces earlier, and not that they are, last to the table to do this. And so I think it's going to take some concerted effort to, in order to create equity, those groups have to be targeted first and early on to get them integrated into the spaces. Otherwise, it'll be the same folks we see already. So maybe.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? If not, you'll have to hear another question generated from ChatGPT.
Hey, Noble.
Hey,
sort of
Kavya,
chime
how we
in.
doing on? How we doing
We
on
had an
time?
audience hand raised, but it's gone now.
Yeah, no, actually, this is exactly why I was just wanted to chime in. Let me help out with a question and answer a little bit. And while we await, there are a couple of hand raises. We've opened up the raise hand button. And so please click on the raise hand and we'll line you up. But in the meantime, Courtney, I'm fully aware of your experience that you led, the product that you developed, the 1,000-cut journey. And I would love for our audience to hear from you. What is that about? And why is it so significantly important for the world to potentially experience such a thing while and as they step into these immersive realities to fully understand the impact these things have? I love this opportunity for you to share that with us.
Yeah, thank you, Kavya. So when I created the 1,000-cut journey, I never used virtual reality before, but I was interested in the model in someone's shoes using these kinds of technologies, and have grown a lot from that space, but was interested in whether encounters and experiences with racism in a virtual setting could be impactful in terms of I'm not so deeply interested in empathy, but more so what we call it. So people's understanding of the world and how social inequities get produced. And can you use virtual experience to improve competency, understanding, right, and intelligence about these kinds of issues? So the experience we created puts you in the shoes of a Black male, as a child, adolescent, and as an adult experiencing racism in different contexts, but it's often misattributed to an experience about being a Black male. It's actually seeing racism and systemic racism from the perspective of a Black male, which is very different. So we're trying to convey that these are the kinds of experiences that start very early in life. They cut across every societal sector. They cut across the life course. And so really trying to help people understand the scale and the pervasiveness of racial inequities and the way that they accumulate and build up over time. And then in work that we're exploring right now, we're trying to think about data visualization and virtual reality, ways in which we can actually visualize structural racism and visualize structural inequities, and how systems of education, health, etc., are intersecting to produce disadvantage. It's really just based on the premise that we can't solve problems we understand. We can't do tech for good if we don't understand what's not good and how we got to not good in the first place. And so, trying to leverage the technology as an educational tool to build awareness and understanding is one way that we're approaching it.
Can you double tap on that for a second? I'm sorry, Kavya. I'm very curious as to where you see the impact, positive impacts of visualizing racism within the medium of XR.
So the way we're seeing it now, that we've run a few studies, and our first paper read through experience, what we're finding is that those who've gone through the VR compared to a control group that didn't go through the VR are more likely, are less colorblind, more likely to name race and racism as factors that contribute to inequities in society. They are more likely to name structural barriers that can get in the way of progress for groups of people. So it's not just a matter of behavior and choice and will and grit, that there are systemic barriers that get in the way of social progress. The people who go through the VR move in the direction we would hope would move on some of those factors compared to people who don't do the VR.
Right. And I've got a follow-on question, Brian, on that thread. Are there existing legal frameworks? Is there precedents to or existing legislation out there that that would be applied to sort of solving for some of the stuff that Courtney's working on?
Interesting question. I think that it's that specific application is probably too new to have legal precedent per se. But I do think that there's a lot of room within the doctrine of academic freedom and freedom of speech within the classroom to be able to use some of these tools, and recognizing, kind of as we were alluding to before, that we live in these virtual worlds constitute pure speech, right? Everything about even the experience is something expressive that was created for a purpose, to fuel that experience. So I think that there is a lot of room to implement these sorts of tools in a classroom setting or in a graduate study setting, without some of the barriers that it might pose to do that in a non-virtual way. And I also got to say, Noble, I'm going to use that phrase now. When I ask somebody to follow up, I'm going to ask them to double tap on that. I like that.
All right, Kavya.
Yeah, so we have a patient, a participant waiting with hand raised. Dr. Heartbeats, you are amplified now. Please go ahead with the question.
Hi, I'm sorry, my dogs are barking, but I wanted to, I hope it's not too loud. I'm also a physician in real life. I am a pediatrician, and in Altspace, I'm building a world to teach people the health effects of music and sound therapy. And we have certain frequencies going and recommending them for depression, anxiety, and trauma, based on the studies I have read. But I was just wondering, like, with the future of the metaverse, like, what are the legal issues I'm going to have to deal with? What do I have to do to make sure that I'm secure and continue to build without legal issues?
Well, it's a broad question, right? Because law covers a wide swath of concerns and experiences. So, but from a physician's perspective, and specifically from a pediatrician's perspective, I think that the first thing that comes to my mind to suggest that you focus on is medical privacy. We've heard a lot already today, and I'm going to hear a lot more this week about the idea of digital privacy in these fully virtual and created spaces. And we don't, when we click on a lot of terms and conditions when we enter these spaces, allowing all sorts of companies to see and utilize our data. And right now, in the way that these media exist, there's really no way around that if you want to use these spaces. So bringing children and bringing patients into this environment and then asking them to share things about themselves or engage in experiences that help you as a physician treat them. Well, that's fraught with privacy issues, and HIPAA and the specific medical privacy structures that we have right now. I don't know that people are pushing that boundary yet, or at least not with children. And so I would certainly consult with the counsel for your organization, your medical company that you work with, before you invest too heavily in some of these. I do believe it can be done, and I've certainly seen therapeutic applications in a whole wide variety that show a lot of promise, and I think that's a brilliant application for this media. Let's do it in a way that's compliant with the privacy structures that we have to work within. That would be my primary concern.
Yeah, the good news here is Dr. Heartbeats. I love the name. On the 14th of December, I believe day 4, Kavya, correct me. We're going to be having a health focused panel that you should absolutely attend, and anyone here who might be interested in that is welcome and encouraged to attend. So at the top of this panel, I didn't give you, Brian, and Courtney an opportunity to introduce yourself. So I think we're coming up on. How are we doing on time, Kavya?
So we do have about 10 minutes before we go into break, and we also have one hand raise if you wanted to take another question.
Okay, so just remind me to allow Brian and Courtney to tell us a little bit about what they do. We'll just sort of close it up and so that everyone here knows how to get in touch with Brian and Courtney as well. So
we have a question from Steam NBC. Yeah, we have a question from Steam NBC.
The interface. Yeah, I think this is an experience week. I'm looking forward to it. Someone earlier had brought up, the concerns as it relates to human rights in the metaverse. And I work with an organization that's focused on conversational voice AI. And we've been doing research on that, which goes back to the UN Declaration of Human Rights for voice as a biometric. So my concerns, or at least the issues I try and pursue, is how can we control our own voice if it's used for identity to get access to a metaverse event, if it's used as we are now in conversation, or potentially if I want to engage in some e-commerce event and purchase or create a business relationship. It seems to me voice will be the most natural way for most of us to do it. So it comes back to the question of, great, how do we protect that human right of my control over my voice? I have some ideas, but I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say.
Sure. So there is a legal framework for that right now. A couple different iterations of that. The broadest is called the right of publicity, or misappropriation of likeness. It's a state level cause of action that exists in roughly half the states that allow you to control some aspect of your identity. Interestingly, in Michigan, where I'm based, there is a right of publicity, but it does not extend to one's voice. So
Yeah, that's what I
there's
was
case
going to
law
get
on
to.
this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. So there's it's a scattershot protection, and there have been efforts for decades to nationalize that. I think
Yes,
that
sir.
that has a ways to go. Now, you mentioned biometric. There are also biometric privacy statutes, most notably in Illinois, that
In
are
California,
becoming
yep.
more. Yeah, sure, and different applications there too. But they're being more aggressively enforced, and most of those, to my recollection, do include voice. And I think exactly what you said, the fact that voice is now becoming more integral and more of a tool to transact in media with, I think that will bring attention to the fact that it's something we're protecting. So we're likely to see more development, but it'll be very granular for the next foreseeable future.
Especially with the metaverse, of course, because yes, gaming is the proverbial toe in the door. But as others have talked about in healthcare or potentially in law, I want to do research. I want to use the metaverse. Okay, how do I protect again my voice to ensure that it's not able to be misused, abused, or taken out of context?
Mm-hmm.
So this is some of the stuff. The group that I work with is called the Open Voice Network. And we spent the last year and a half, we advised GDPR and then just sent in a request to FTC on these comments about, yeah, voice is getting more popular as we get into multimedia, omni-channel environments. What's on the books now from a legal perspective, but also from that human rights perspective, what sort of recourse do I have if something goes awry or I want to revoke my access to someone using my voice to train an AI model or feed their marketing machine?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
and
one of
that's
those
an interesting
solutions-
angle because the law right now sees these protections as mostly being a commercial interest. Your voice is
yes,
a commercial
commerce. That's right. That's right.
commerce, right? Yeah, but the protection of your identity originally stemmed out of the law of privacy and
Yes.
of individual dignity, right? And so there's certainly you've raised both aspects of those, but when you speak of human rights, I really think he harkens back to that original source of law in the idea of individual dignity. But I would just say, keep doing the work that you're doing. You're talking to the right agencies. You're making the right arguments. So keep up the good work.
Yeah, no, and again,
Yeah, sorry, Steve, that was me. Just in the interest of time, I know there is another question, but Noble, you made a request that you wanted to at least give our time to Courtney and Brian. So I think we're gonna move back to, and I don't see Noble here, but I would take Noble's request, Courtney, and honor that to potentially sharing with our viewers how can they get in touch with you and how can they benefit from your insights, your experience, and Brian, you just to close this out. Courtney, if you could unmute.
Yeah, sure. I'll defer to Courtney if she's able to respond. Are you having audio issues? Well, I tell you what, Kavya, to make use of the time, I'll jump in. And Courtney, if you get your audio working, feel free to interrupt me and jump back in. But my name's Brian. I am an attorney, as I mentioned. I work at a law firm based in Detroit, Michigan. The name of it is up there. You can find it on the web at Warner, or rather WNJ.com. And you can find on my information there, my contact information. For several years, I ran a blog called Augmented Legality, where we talked a lot about these sorts of issues. That's kind of mothballed a little bit, but I continue to speak and write on these issues. I did write a book in 2015 called Augmented Reality Law, and that was the first, as far as I know, treatment of that topic in a book form. But this is always something that has been very near and dear to my heart. I got the opportunity to litigate the first freedom of speech issue in the augmented reality case and get a city ordinance struck down on First Amendment grounds that regulated AR applications. So I love to see the effort of Kavya and so many others now moving this conversation forward.
Thank you, Brian.
Hi,
Let's see, Courtney. Yes, we can hear you,
yes,
Courtney.
okay. Yeah, the audio's, the mute, unmute function is still going in and out, but yeah, so I'm still a hanger-oner to Twitter, so that's still the best place to track me at Courtney Cogburn. And LinkedIn is another space. I'm mostly focused on research, but happy to stay connected through any of those channels. And then you can find any published work under my name as well.
Right. Thank you, both of you. And I know Noble is probably might join or not, but in order to close this panel, I would love to ask both of you any closing thoughts on what should we know today for a better tomorrow? What is on top of your mind as we are assembled here today on human rights in the metaverse? Brian, yes, you have a legal perspective, but what is the urgent matter and some kind of a closing thought? You think we've got 3 minutes? That's 1 minute to each of you. And yeah, go for it, Brian.
Okay. Well, I think the thing that happens to be on top of mind right now is not to run so headlong into these technologies that we lose a sense of who we are in the physical world, in the real world, because that's ultimately, no matter how good our technology is, that's where we really exist. That's where the interactions we have matter the most. We've already talked even in the last hour some great ways that these virtual experiences can enhance our experience of the physical world, can change our perspectives, as Courtney mentioned, of how we perceive others in the physical world. That's ultimately going to be the only measure of meaning and the only measure of importance that matters. And so I'd say use these augmented worlds, these virtual worlds, cautiously and thoughtfully, but never in a way that interrupts our ability to appreciate and interact with others in the room.
Amazing. Thank you, Brian. And Courtney, what's on top of your mind? And then I also see hand raised, and we love to entertain them as well. So stand tight. I will come to you. Let's hear from Courtney. Any closing thoughts? And then we can certainly entertain questions. We have 5 more minutes.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just add that I think right now we treat, I think, diversity in this space as trying to engage diverse consumers. And I think it's really critical that we engage a range of voices, particularly the most marginalized and oppressed people in our society, in the design of what the metaverse is and will become. And, from the very bones to all the social elements. I think my biggest concern is that we'll, as Ruha Benjamin says, continue to live in a particular set of people's imaginations. And I think we'll recreate some of the things that are so wrong in the physical space, and we'll just recreate them in this space as well, unless we start to engage. I think some of the people who have the clearest perspective on what injustice feels like and what a lack of safety feels like, unless we ask them, engage them, and have them engage in this design process of what the metaverse will ultimately evolve into, I think we'll end up in the exact same place as we are now.
Noble, welcome back. We are reflecting on your request. I wanted to honor that. And then go over to, we have about almost like 5 minutes. So I already gave you, so Mystic is ready to question. So you already have the mic open. Mystic, go for it. Mystic, you have to unmute.
Follow it.
And if we're having difficulty, how about we go to Peter, who is also asking a question. Peter. your megaphone, unmute, and state your question.
Oh, thank you. Glad to be here. This has been a fun experience. I think my question really stems from kind of to piggyback off of, the voice and the representation, because a lot of these creators, right? And I'm a big fan of user-generated content. And as everyone starts to bring in their own independent voice and the power to be able to secure, what's kind of from a legal framework to tie in with different various protocols that are going to get involved, either play to earn gaming, as NFTs become more involved in the, I guess, in the building of the metaverse. What's your take on how to secure a lot of that? Because, and I guess to pull from example, Nike really wanted to embrace their brand and their voice, maybe not speech, but their brand recognition by building tools for collaboration. Do you see a future of more of that, of the brand presence coming in to help secure their own trademark and IP by utilizing this capability for user-generated content and blockchain protocol?
So a lot there, and I appreciate the question. You've obviously stayed on top of the recent developments, and I'd say yes. There's no doubt that trademarked and branded content will continue to drive a good portion of what we experience, because again, it's where the resources are. That's what the money is driving, because these are new and interesting ways for these brands to make money and to extend their brand awareness. So absolutely think probably a depressingly large amount of what we experience will continue to be branded for the foreseeable future. But those brands that succeed take exactly the strategy that you're alluding to, which is engaging their customers, giving them an experience that has value, separate from the brand itself, that makes them want to interact with it and takes advantage of what's unique and interesting about this medium. Things that are just flat advertising probably be ignored as readily as they are in any other medium.
Noble, shall we take one more question? We have a couple of minutes left, or do you want to make a closing statement? I had the opportunity to ask that from both Courtney and Brian, but what do you suggest?
I think with a minute left, I think we should do some closing statements. And if you could, Brian and Courtney, tell us where we can follow your work and what you're doing next, or what you're doing in this realm, and how others can follow that work. That'd be great. Let's start with Brian.
All right. Well, I will tell you that while you were out, we followed your instructions that you left us. We did kind of have this conversation to an extent. We will shared some ways that folks can get a hold of us. But I'll take the one point on what we're doing next. I think would be interesting, and I'd like to hear that from Courtney as well. But I'm right now focusing on, in this medium, representing content creators and helping them navigate the legal challenges ahead of them, so that they can get their applications out there. We see very few grassroots independent creator content in the medium right now. It's all getting bought up. All the great startups that had a lot of promise are getting bought up by the big channels, right? The big social platforms, and getting wrapped up into those. And so I've been doing the work that I can with independent creators, trying to make sure they get their opportunity to be heard and experienced as well.
Amazing. I think we are just on time, Noble, so I think we have to wrap this up here today. I mean, I'll let you just have the last moment. Let's thank everyone.
Yeah, you're right on the money. Sorry, I got some technical difficulties at the last hour, but I'm hoping and glad that this largely, with the exception of my technical difficulties, went off without a hitch. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you especially to Banu. I don't know where you are, for all the hard work that you've put into this. Kavya, we will not be here without your leadership. I'm in awe, and you know, everyone else that contributed to the success. And of course, lastly, thank you to you, the audience, for being here today. And that's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Noble. Thank you, everyone. And let's take a 5-minute break, and we will be right back at 11:10 PST.